Welcome to Books on Air, the podcast that tells the story behind the book. It includes insights from authors about how they compose their work, what inspires them, and what they hope you'll take away from their book. Here's your host for this episode of Books on Air, Suzanne Harris.
Welcome to the Books on Air podcast. I'm Sloan Fremont, filling in for Suzanne Harris. This is a podcast where listeners get the secret story behind every book. Joining me today is M.E Taylor, author of the book Brothers. Brothers is about life in Roman Britain, about betrayal, treachery, about stolen gold and hidden treasure, and about forbidden love. Margaret, welcome to the Books on Air podcast. I'm so happy you're here.
Yes, thank you very much. I'm very happy to be here, and I appreciate the opportunity. So lovely to be here. Thank you.
Yeah. So let's start out by telling the audience just a little bit about yourself and what led you to write your book, Brothers.
Well, obviously, I live in Britain. I was born in a county, Gloucestershire, which has got a lot of Roman remains. And all my life, I've been very aware of the Roman remains. And the thing is, the Romans built in stone, so there's quite a lot of it left lying around. People have been stealing it ever since, but now they've got controls over what can be done to it. And so it is, as it is. And I started thinking about who the people were who occupied these buildings. So many people, of course, remained native Romans, but when the invasion happened in AD 43, the Romans set about convincing the natives to live the Roman lifestyle and encouraged them to live in stone-built or brick-built houses and in towns, which they hadn't done so before. And that's really how I started thinking about them.
And so can you tell us a little bit about some of the characters in your book and maybe set the scene for us about where it takes place? Yeah,
I set the story to start towards the end of the first century when a family of Romans, the father, Gaius Marcius, had offended his emperor, and he was lucky not to get killed, but he got told to go to Britain and start helping the people move into the Roman way of life and build towns and build housing for the veteran soldiers. And so he came to Britain and he chose to reside in Gloucestershire. It wasn't Gloucestershire then, of course, because the natives there were considered friendly. He had with him 2 daughters and a son, little children, and the boy took a fancy to a native boy. The Roman child was called Gaius Marcius, and the native boy was called Verluccus. Unfortunately, Verluccus didn't want to become a friend of Gaius, and so he was kidnapped by force and branded and taken into the household. He didn't stay there very long. He managed to run away and hide, and he was never heard of again for 9 years. And Gaius got over his loss, and that was the end of Verluccus as far as the family was concerned.
Mm-hmm. And so does the book chronicle their journey together then?
Yeah, well, Gaius grows up and starts going to school, but Verluccus lives for most of the time he's away with a native family who take an old woman he goes to labour for, and she takes him in and raises him. Mm-hmm. But the community he lives in is attacked by Roman soldiers, and while he is off looking after sheep, and he comes back to find the carnage. And he meets up with some natives, rebels, and discovers amongst them his own long-lost brothers who had left the family home when he was just a much younger child. And they take him in, and he vows revenge on what the Romans had done to these people. Mm-hmm. He becomes quite a wild, ferocious warrior, named by the natives as blood spiller. So that's the name he takes.
Wow. Yeah, I would say he is ferocious in that way, with that name.
Yes, well, in the story, it tells you how he came by that name, but I won't go into that now.
Yeah, right. So what are some of your favorite parts that you got to write about in your book?
Well, in the course of time, when Verluccus gets captured, he gets taken back and returned to the Gaius Marcius family. And it is there that he meets the daughter of the household, who is a young lady. Now she's about 14 years old, and she had been betrothed to a man who was amongst the Roman army. And it is realised that the man met his death at the hands of Verluccus. So initially she wants him murdered too. She wants him dead. So it's not a very good start.
Mm-hmm.
He resists for a long time, but gradually Gaius induces him to become tame and accept his lot as slavery. And during the course of his life in the household, he falls in love with Gaia. Mm. And at first, of course, she's not very bothered about him at all. But she begins to look at him in a different way. In the meantime, having brought him to Lucius' household, the general of the army, who is also Lucius's brother, Marcus, has left his army up where they had wiped this tribe out, only to learn that the gold which they had started recovering again had been stolen. Mm. And so he's in trouble. So he has to go back and try to capture the renegade who had stolen the gold from the Romans, which the Romans were taking from the natives, of course, by the way.
Right. And so as you're telling these different scenes in the book, it seems like each character has a problem to solve or a hard maybe journey that they're on.
Yes.
What would you say some of the themes in the book are that you wanted to bring in for the readers?
Well, in order to recover the gold from the natives, Marcus discovers a lot about Verluccus's identity, and he forces him by coercion to betray the leader of the gang by threatening to crucify the brother who remains at home. Mm-hmm. And rather than that happen, Verluccus agrees to go, and he betrays his brother basically, and his brother is forced to surrender himself to the Romans. But he gets a promise that if he does that, there won't be any more fighting. He'll be told to go back and live where he came from, at home, where Verluccus comes from. And he'll be pardoned. So he gets a good deal out of it. But Verluccus has to remain a slave. Mm. And he continues in that line with Gaius. However, Gaia by this time has become married. And she has expressed feelings towards Verluccus. He had gold. The gold which was taken from him when he was first captured had been handed to Marcus, who then wanted to return it. So he's got some kind of reward for what he's done for the Romans.
Yeah, so it sounds like a lot of internal struggling and internal themes,
There are many things. I divided the book into internal books. Uh-huh. So there are 6 of those, and different events happen during the course of book 1, book 2, book 3. Mm. And book tells you what was going on with Verluccus when he was absent from the household, when he was living with this woman up in the Welsh, what are now the Welsh hills. Uh-huh. So that's book 3. Book 4 is when he surrenders to Gaius and says, okay, I accept that. That's my lot. I've got to work for you. And then gradually, Gaia changes her feelings towards him, seeks him out, and they become lovers.
Yeah, so it's got all of the elements there of forbidden love, it sounds like.
It's very forbidden. Very forbidden, yes.
And internal family struggles, and then even the journey each person goes on with determining right or wrong for themselves.
Yes, well, Gaia knows that, she's doing wrong. She's got a husband and she's making love to what is the lowest of the low, basically. Yeah. The slave. Mm-hmm. And the time comes when he's got to go back and surrender himself to his master. That's her brother. But he's created such a good impression with Marcus that he wants to help him. And they find themselves, after he's been forced to fight a gladiator to entertain the Romans, they find themselves alone while the Romans, having celebrated this victory he's made with fighting the gladiator, they go off and have a feast, and Gaia and Verluccus have one secret night together, believe might be captured or betrayed, but they take the chance and they have that. But the next day he has to leave, go to Rome, because that's where the family's gone, and that's where Gaius is going to join his parents. And Gaia has to stay, remain in London. In Britain, she's going to move to London with her husband, Londinium, as it then was.
Right.
And that's how it ends.
So as you were writing your book and creating all these characters and these storylines with these different themes and, internal struggles, problems, all the things that they went through, what surprised you the most about your book?
Surprised me. I could manage to finish it, I think. No, I don't think I was surprised particularly. I felt that I knew the characters. I felt that they were real people, and they had real substance to them. They weren't unlikely, shall we say. I think they were, all right, they're fictitious, most of them. There are one or two real characters mentioned because of the dates and whatnot, but I just felt that they sounded realistic people.
Yeah, and realistic problems that the readers can relate to in some way, even in modern times.
Yeah, sorry.
No, go ahead.
Well, I was just going to say, yes, although it's a long time ago, they were modern people. They were very modern for their time. And they're just like people today. They have their different values. Obviously, the Roman values were, if you want work, you get a slave to do it. You don't do it yourself.
Right.
We employ and pay people wages. But there were a lot of people freed by the Romans who remained as freedmen in the household or freed women. Mm-hmm. So they have values, culture, which is so different to ours. It's sometimes difficult to relate to it, but in many ways you can relate to them because they were very sort of people that you could understand.
Right.
I think.
Right. And was there any particular scene or maybe even a character that you found difficult to write about?
That's a bit tricky. Difficult to write about? No, I don't think difficult. I enjoyed doing the writing. What I found sometimes difficult, I would set up a situation like I'd set up Verluccus in such opposition to Gaius. I thought, I am never going to get this sorted out. So that's when I introduced the idea of him going to see a wise native man who spoke Verluccus's language. And he goes to see him. He's sort of counselled, really. That's what it boils down to. And that's at the end of that, okay, I'll be his slave. That's what he wants. So he does, and he makes a success of it because they become very close, really. Although it upsets his father. He's a bit concerned about this closeness. He's wondering what's going on. And I'm afraid quite a lot of other people are wondering what's going on between them.
Right. Who would you say your book would appeal to and why?
Well, I think it's certainly suitable for young adults, but any sort of age above that. It's not a children's book, but it should appeal, I think, to people who like romance, historical novels, and I don't know, Roman Britain, I think, is probably one of the reasons. I think that people might find it interesting enough to want to go and learn a bit more about Roman Britain. I hope so.
Yeah.
Anyway.
Yeah, and to me, that's always so interesting to read about. Living in the U.S., of course, that's a different world that I'm not into every day, and so being able to read about that, to understand that and to picture that, that to me is very interesting. To be able to be transported to another place, not only geographically, but also time in a different time period too.
Yeah, and I do know there are quite a lot of people in America who are interested in Roman, but excuse me. I was recently, at the end of June, on Hadrian's Wall, and the hotel we stayed in, there were quite a few American people staying there also. Mm-hmm. Come to do the walk, because it's a very popular walking place, and others have come to look at the sites like we were doing.
Right.
So I do know there is a great interest in it.
Yeah, for sure. And being able to, like I said, being able to be transported both in time and location is always, to me, always makes a great book to be able to fall into, because then you're totally into the book, because you're so caught up in everything that imagining all of those different places and the different scenes.
I hope so. Yes. Yes.
Well, it's been great to talk to you this week, Margaret. Is there any closing thoughts you have for the listeners to make sure that they know about your book?
Well, I'd like to say that the book ends with the parting of Gaia and Verluccus. But in fact, the book finishes with a sequel, which is at the moment being prepared for publication, be out shortly, which is called Brothers-in-Law. And that's as far as I'm telling you anything about it.
So they heard it here first. Yes. Well, amazing. Okay, that's amazing. So there will be a sequel to Brothers. That's great.
Yes, there is.
Great.
Yes, it's being prepared right now. Yeah.
Awesome. Well, Margaret, thank you again for joining us today and being our guest on Books on Air.
Yeah. Can I also say, I think you can find my book at Amazon. Yes,
and I'll link to that in the show notes.
Yeah. Okay. Mm-hmm. And Barnes and Noble, Author House, and on my website. You've got those details, I believe, have you?
Yes, I do. And I'll put all of that in the show notes so that the listeners can easily find
super.
It.
Great. Thank you ever so much. Thank you.
Thank you. You've been listening to the Books on Air podcast, brought to you on webtalkradio.net. You can also hear this podcast on Spotify, iHeartRadio, Stitcher, and Apple Podcasts. I'm Sloan Fremont, and I hope you'll join us for the next Books on Air podcast. Remember, you never know who's going to be here, and you never know what we're going to talk about. Thank you so much for listening.